Where they would be
Hi, hello everyone. It's 7 o'clock, so I think it's time for us to start. Welcome to the members of PAC to this evening's meeting, and welcome to our officers, to guests and observers. My name is Councillor Nikos Souslous. I'm the chair of the committee, and thank you all for coming. Before we begin, just a few quick housekeeping notices. If you're going to speak, please wait for me to prompt you before speaking. And please indicate this by raising your hands. And if you could also tell us who you are and the organization or department you represent. We have officers and guests and observers. So, as I said, please introduce yourselves. We will also have some contributors who will be joining us over Zoom. Some of our officers have been unable to join today due to the train strikes. They wanted to attend, but that has not been possible. And of course, if you're joining online, we'll make sure that you're included. Just indicate, raise your virtual hand, and either myself or Bathsheba will make sure that you get to speak. Alongside our members, the regular members of the committee, we're also joined by Councillor Rebecca Harvey, who is the Cabinet Member for Social Inclusion and Community Safety, and Councillor Rowan Ree, who is the Cabinet Member for Finance and Reform. Thank you both for coming. We have a lot to cover today, and I'm conscious of the limited time we have, so please do not be offended if I try to ask you to move the discussion along. And we do have some refreshments and some biscuits, not gluten-free, I'm afraid, but please help yourself. And if you need a comfort break, there are facilities by the lifts. We do not expect a fire alarm to sound, but it can always sound because that's what happens in this building. So if one does sound, we will adjourn, and we'll just leave in an orderly fashion by the nearest exit, which is next to the lifts. Right, we can now begin. Item number 1, apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies?
No apologies.
No apologies, thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? No, that's okay, we can carry on. Item 3, the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 22nd of November, 2022. We ask the committee to approve the minutes as an accurate record. Are the meetings approved, the minutes approved? And the outstanding actions noted, and are they accurate? Good, okay, thank you. In that case, we will move on to the substantive items. We've made a small change to the running order, and we'll begin with what was billed as item 7. So first we'll hear on the 2023 medium-term financial strategy. We have presentations from Mark, Head of Finance, Strategic Planning and Investment. Bram came from Strategic Director of Environment. Kelly Gooch, Head of Finance and Environment, and will also be joined by Matthew Hooper and Ian Thurlow from the community safety team, and Councillor Ree, you're always a hand to contribute. So yeah, we can begin whenever you're ready to. Andre.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm delighted to be here to discuss the budget with you. I'm particularly pleased because this is actually my 7th PAC in 10 days, the 7th and final PAC. So I'm especially pleased to be at this one, and I've had a lot of practice at doing this introduction now. So hopefully I've got all of the I've ironed all of the kinks out of it. I just want to start by thanking all of the people who've been involved in putting this budget together. It really has been quite a piece of work. Andre and the whole of the finance team who've been poring through the spreadsheets, trying to make all the numbers add up. The cabinet members and the members of staff in the departments who've been going through their departmental budgets line by line, trying to find savings and efficiencies after 12 years of going through these budgets line by line, trying to find savings and efficiencies in the past. It's remarkable work considering we only got the final figure for the local government financial settlement 2 days before Parliament stopped for Christmas recess. So a lot of this budget has been based on assumptions and best guesses and forecasting by the teams, and so they've done an excellent job to be able to get us to this position. It's also the 5th year in a row when we've had a single year local government financial settlement. But that makes it very difficult to plan for the future. So again, it takes an awful lot of hard work and good forecasting by the teams to be able to get us into this position so soon into the new year. And they've done a great job. We've got a budget that I'm particularly proud of. It's a very tough time to be putting a budget together at the moment. Inflation, as we know at the moment, is at 10.5%. A couple of months ago, it was at over 11%. Interest rates 3.5% today. Tomorrow, but the Monetary Policy Committee are meeting. Very likely they'll go up even higher. And the economic conditions that we're operating in are obviously very difficult. You know, the Bank of England are predicting a recession later this year. The IMF, as we heard earlier this week, have come out and predicted that we're going to have a recession in this country. Now, that has a huge impact on council finances, not only in terms of the demand for services and residents, but also in terms of the cost of the services that we are providing. And the financial constraints that we're putting this budget together in are also incredibly tight. Back in 2010, we had a grant from government of £164 million. Today, that figure is 116 million, a real terms cut of 56%. Now, there aren't many organisations in this country that are expected to provide the same service they were providing 13 years ago with less than half of the resources. But local government is expected to do that. Here in Hammersmith and Fulham, though, we're not just doing what we were doing back in 2010. We're doing more than that. We've gone further. We're providing more for our residents. We've abolished home care charges. We're providing free breakfast for primary school children. We've maintained weekly bin collections when so many councils have moved to once every 2 weeks or 3 weeks. We funded a new law enforcement team here in Hammersmith and Fulham who keep our streets safe and clean. And we've introduced our ethical debt collection policy, which means that we won't use bailiffs to collect council tax debt from residents. Now, in putting this budget together, our priority has been protecting these frontline services, and I'm very proud to say that we've been able to do that. Now, the difficult economic conditions that I've mentioned are tough for councils, yes, but they're even tougher for the people who we represent, the residents who we're here to serve. We know that prices are going up, bills are going up, food costs more, everything seems to cost more these days, and lots of residents are really struggling with that. We want to do everything we can to protect those residents, and that's why, as part of this budget, despite the constraints, we've managed to find nearly £1 million to put together a ring-fenced fund to help residents through the cost of living crisis. Now I'm going to hand over to Andre, who can talk us through the small print of the budget, but I'm grateful to be here to be able to answer your questions and to explain the budget to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Andre, you have the floor.
Good evening. So I'm Andre Mark. I'm the Head of Finance for Strategic Planning and Investment in the Council. I'm just going to talk through some of the highlights around the budget for next year and also touch upon the kind of the medium-term financial strategy that encompasses this as well. So in terms of the budget, there's kind of three areas really. One, outlining our strategic operating environment, and I won't touch upon that too much because Councillor Ree has done an excellent job talking about that. Then talking about the proposed strategy and budget for 22-23, and then looking towards the medium term in terms of 24-25 and what that looks like. So in terms of the strategic operating environment, so I think, like I said, Councillor Ree's touched upon kind of the wider macro economic factors that are in play, particularly around inflation and rising interest rates as well. The 1 year settlement that we get as part of the local government finance settlement does make it a bit more difficult and challenging in terms of financial planning and making best use of resources, particularly the timing of that as well. In terms of the local issues or operating environment that we're in, particularly demographic changes. So we have an aging population across the board, and particularly in Hammersmith and Fulham, that impact is felt. In addition to that, we see increasingly complex cases and demands on that as well, which come at a cost pressure in terms of the financial side of things. We also have major regeneration programs going on. So the Civic Campus, Education City, amongst a few, and those have a particular impact as well in terms of the environment we're in. And then also as well, talking about the pressures on services. So the home care service that we provide, school transport, amongst many others, are complex and often can lead to financial pressures around us. Next slide, please. So in terms of the proposed revenue budget strategy, we try to align the strategy with kind of the key aims and the vision of the council. So that is around preserving frontline services, ensuring the continued delivery of those key priorities for residents, looking to increase investment in services where possible, and also ensuring the financial resilience of the council, just in case to weather any future shocks. In terms of the key principles underpinning the budget and our strategy, we had a 5% allowance for pay and price inflation, and investment, like I said, investment in delivery of key council priorities. We also looked, like I said, about maintaining resilience, so retaining contingencies, and also allowing for the costs of planned borrowing. In terms of the council tax increase, and also about the savings and some of the investment, I'll talk about those in a few other slides as well, but those are some of the key principles which underpin the budget strategy. Next slide, please. So in terms of council tax, to put it into context, Hammersmith and Fulham has one of the lowest nationally in terms of its Band D, which is the average council tax that is paid. So roughly about £832 in the financial year 22-23. And a 1% change in that would yield £8.30 per annum per household in terms of a rise in that. Now, within that, we do have a council tax support scheme, which just under half of the households, are eligible for some sort of support in that, which means that we just have 53% who pay the council tax in full. So it's a very generous and well-backed scheme in terms of that council tax support. And it should be noted that as part of the autumn statement, and indeed as part of the local government finance settlement, it's expected that authorities in England would increase their council tax by 3% and also levy the 2% adult social care precept, which is available to them. So that was part of the funding within the settlement. So in terms of just an overview and a summary of the budget for next financial year. So as outlined, pay and price inflation, that 5% roughly is about 13.6 million. The investment close to £11 million, and we'll talk a bit more in the detail about the investment and also the savings as well. As Councillor Bree mentioned, there's nearly £1 million which has been set aside as a cost of living fund. And then also we have to put aside money as well for the additional cost of borrowing where interest rates have risen and needing to meet the additional cost of borrowing as a result of that. Just about the only good thing that has come out of rising interest rates has been the ability to use our cash balances and to reinvest that into services. So we have estimated roughly about £5 million we'll be able to yield as a council from our cash balances and be able to use that to reinvest in services. Next slide, please. So in terms of the savings, so £2.9 million of savings have been proposed across the council. That might seem quite modest within a budget of nearly 186 million, but it's important to highlight that those savings are within the context of nearly 40 million pounds of savings, which have been proposed and delivered over the last 5 financial years. And in terms of the major savings, so there's efficiency, so improving commissioning and children's services, looking at digital technologies and ways to improve services within social care, and also some savings around improving hospital discharge and independent living in social care as well. So those are some of the main items in terms of savings proposed for the budget. Next slide, please. In terms of investment, as mentioned, nearly £11 million is proposed as part of the budget as investment. The major items within here, so the key one really, social care, just over £4 million looking to invest to tackle hospital discharges, as we're seeing an increasing number of hospital discharges come into social care and having to manage that demand, and also dealing with the aforementioned demographic changes as well and the more complex needs that our older residents face. There's investment in the new waste collection service, and then Bram will touch upon that in a moment, and also looking at the food strategy, so continuing free breakfasts in primary, free lunch in secondaries where we currently operate the existing scheme, and also extending some of that to outer term support for children. And just under £1 million, investment in our homelessness services. So again, as prices rise with temporary accommodation, looking to meet that investment to ensure that we can deliver those services effectively. Next slide, please. So in terms of financial resilience, looking towards our reserves. So it's important to note, so in terms of where our reserves land, Hammersmith and Fulham is about in the middle in terms of London authorities, in terms of reserves, and it's deemed about an adequate level of reserves where we hold them at the moment. The Chartered Institute for Public Finance, so the main accountancy body for public finance, do recommend a general balance, and this balance is kind of held to weather any shocks. So we've seen in the past other authorities have suffered significant financial impacts from cyber attacks, for example, and that has come at a great cost. And for Hammersmith and Fulham, the recommended balance is anywhere between 19 to 25 million, and the budget proposes to hold a general balance within that level to ensure that we've got good financial resilience. We also have earmarked reserves as well, which are being applied for 22-23, and those are ring-fenced reserves, which are reliant to our business planning to invest in big programs. So, for example, the IT refresh upgrade in terms of devices. And then looking forward, so beyond 23-24, looking a bit more forward in terms of the medium-term picture. From a national level and certainly on a local level, we're going to see a continuing difficult operating environment. So the OBR forecast at 7.4% inflationary level for this year, and they do expect that to tail off slightly in 24. But again, that is a forecast, an early forecast at this stage. So we're still operating somewhat of an unknown. In terms of pay and prices, so the current medium-term financial strategy allows for a 3% allowance in terms of inflation for 24-25, which may seem at odds slightly with the operating environment that we forecast to be in. But officers will obviously propose a number of mitigations to try and weather that storm as much as possible. We're expecting there to be continuing local demographic pressures. Hammersmith and Fulham has somewhat of a transient population as well. So we'll probably see increasing older demographic come through and increasingly complex needs that will need to be dealt with. And those will need to be addressed as part of the medium-term financial strategy. And at this moment in time, we have a forecast budget gap of around £17 billion for 24-25. So that's kind of the starting as to where we are at this point in time. And just in terms of next steps, so as Councillor Reid mentioned, this is 7th PAC that he's dealt with. And so this is the last one in terms of that. And then on to Cabinet on the 6th of February, so next Monday, and then full council for ratification of the budget on the 23rd of February. So just to give a highlight as to where we are in terms of the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Bram?
Yes, thank you very much. Just wait for the slides to come up. Yeah. Thank you very much, Chair. My name is Bram Kanth. I'm the Strategic Director of Environment, and I'm going to take you through some of the highlights of the revenue budget for 23-24 in the Environment Department. Next slide. This slide basically gives you a feeling of the breadth of services that are covered in the Environment Department, some of the volumes and transactions, and I just wanted to take you through some of those. There's over 5 million waste and recycling collections. There's over 12,000 noise nuisance complaints. There's 4 leisure centres, 53 parks and open spaces. There's over 18,000 miles of streets swept. There's over 300,000 library books issued and over 138,000 e-books and audio. There's 120,000 council tax cases managed, over 16,000 street works inspections, 187,000 contact calls taken, 90 million pounds worth of council tax and 180 million pounds worth of business rates collected, 25,000 trees, 240 kilometres of roads, 230 hectares of green space. We're also responsible for the climate ecological emergency. We've introduced 2,500 electric vehicle charging points that are installed, and we've also processed 194,000 benefits applications. Next slide. This slide basically deals with some of the recent achievements within the Environment Department. We've invested £4.7 million in the law enforcement stroke gangs team to tackle crime and antisocial behaviour at no extra cost to the residents. We've secured £2.2 million from developer contributions. We've also been award-winning scheme for the LGC Future Places winner, which is in relation to the traffic congestion pollution reduction scheme in South Fulham. Our climate change net zero plan was independently rated as the best in London. We're leading the way on electric charging points with a record grant of 4.2 million from the Office of Zero Emission Vehicles, and we've now introduced 2,500 across the borough. Providing the cost of living response and support, we've paid out £9 million in energy-related grants and 13 million in retail relief. In terms of the resident experience and access programme, we're improving residents' access to key council services whilst protecting to save around £800,000 a year. We've got challenging service delivery models and budgets. Last year, we turned £67,000 underspent, and we've also got a significant commercial income of 12 million. And lastly, we've been awarded 5th place in parks for London, and that's up from 27th place. Next slide. This slide gives you an idea of how the environment budget is actually spread across the different services within the department. But as you can see, there's around about £100 million worth of expenditure and about £30 million worth of income. So you can see that we're quite dependent on income to make the balance the budget in the environment department. Next slide. In terms of some of the changes that are relevant to this PAC, continuing investment of gangs at 4.7 million and supporting victims domestic violence at £200,000. Significant capital investment in our CCTV, that's £5 million over a 4-year period. We've made an additional 5% investment for inflationary increases for both major contracts and council staff pay, and continuation of the REAP programme, improving residents' experience, access to services, saving an additional £237,000 from the 23-24 budget, but overall an £800,000 saving on the programme. And we've also got a general 10% inflationary uplift on fees and charges, with the exception of statutory services charges that council cannot influence, mostly frozen at 22-23 rates. Next slide. This slide deals with some of the future strategic budget issues. We've got significant funding requirements for addressing the climate and ecological emergency. In regards to Hammersmith Bridge, we're undertaking works at risk, pending confirmation of funding contributions from the Department of Transport and TfL. We've got provisional waste collection services not yet agreed as part of the new contract required to meet our business plan objective of securing 40% recycling. We've got significant national inflationary pressures impacting on service spend, e.g. energy and fuel, and current service contracts. In terms of the national public finance pressures impacting on specific grants, such as TfL and their situation, continuous pressures on services and income due to the cost of living. We've got £12 million to bring in terms of commercial income waste and increasing energy costs. And lastly, we've got ongoing pressure and challenges to secure funding for the corporate business plan objectives. I think that's the last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bram. If there are no other officer contributions, I think we can proceed with questions from members of the committee. Are there any questions? Yeah, Councillor Dean.
Thanks very much. If I could just get a bit more of a breakdown of the 4.7 million, how much of that is allocated to the LETs, how much to the gangs unit? And within the LETs, can you give any breakdown of wages, equipment, uniform, vehicles, and how that money is spent? You may not have the details now, I accept, but.
Thank you for your question. I'm Kelly Gooch. I'm Head of Finance for the Environment Department. I don't have the detailed breakdown of subjective. We can get that to you after the meeting. But in terms of the 4.7 million, about £1 million of that is on the gangs unit, and the remaining 3.7 is on the LET team.
Thanks very much. And do you know what the total council developer contributions are and what proportion of that is spent on the LETs and the gangs unit?
Yeah, so we've secured £2.2 million per annum in developer contributions. That pretty much makes up about half of the cost of the LET team, and it fully funds the gangs unit.
And sorry, what proportion of the total developer contributions that the council gets across all areas
I'm
is that?
sorry, I don't have that. We'll have to get that back to you.
Thanks. And may I ask why the LET wages are pretty much as high as a starting police officer? Do you know the analysis for that? Why they've been set at that level?
Neil, do you want to come on that? Yeah.
So obviously the salaries for the LET officers are in line with what their job requirements are and went through the full HR approval process. I think in regard to the contribution and obviously the comparison to the police officers on cost are significantly higher to the Metropolitan Police and the on cost are to the local authority for the LET officers.
Thanks very much. And just one final question in relation to the sort of medium term. The last two planning meetings have been cancelled because there's been not as many planning applications as normal, meaning there's not going to be as much development, meaning there's not going to be as much developer contributions going forwards. How will that affect funding for these services in the sort of medium term? Has that been taken into account?
Thank you very much for the question. First of all, the planning contributions, they're sort of historic ones, so they're not the ones in the current process. So when you actually allocate it, it's the previous planning negotiations that would have done for developments probably going back to the last 5 years. So that's how the pot is actually building up. I don't think there's any indication from talking to the planning department that there is actually any drop off or ease. It just happened to be a freak period over the Christmas period where the applications weren't getting processed to planning committees. If so.
Thanks very much. It'd be great if I could have some of those statistics by the end of this week or start of next week, if possible. Thanks.
Thank you. Just Councillor Dinsmore, your question about the pay scales. I would just like to refer you to also the minutes from the July 2022 meeting that we had, because we had a more or less similar discussion, and at the time Neil and Matthew Hooper also explained and also how it compares to the police and how they have in the police much higher costs when you include the training, although on paper it may appear that they're paid the same. Thank you for the questions. Are there any other questions? Yeah, Councillor Miri.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your presentations so far. I just wanted to follow up actually on Councillor Dinsmore's questions with regards to the 2.2 million from developer contributions. Is that money that has already been spent on the lets, or is it money that will be spent over the next year?
So that's an annual cost, so year on year. So as Bram said, that's developer contributions that have been secured to date. So we already have the cash in the bank, and some of that is for negotiated planning contributions going forward. So it's a process that continues to change as new planning agreements are agreed. But in our plan for our budget, we are assuming the 2.2 million is ongoing.
Thank you. And so sorry if I'm not understanding correctly. So that funds the LETs for a year, or part of the funding for the LETs for 1 year?
Yes, that's right. It's an annual cost. So we budget for that every year. So we assume that is continuing.
Sure. And I had a sort of related question, maybe Neil and Karis can come in on this, or Councillor Ree, just with regards to the growth of the LET team. So I think, or if Mo is dialing in online, if he could contribute as well. I think the only frustration I have with the LETs is that there aren't enough of them. So I'd be interested to hear if there are any plans to expand the size of the LETs. And, you know, I'd be interested to hear about that from a sort of operational standpoint, but also from a financial standpoint, if there is any thought being put to that budget increase going ahead potentially. Thank you.
To take operation the budget. So in terms of the financing, so our budget plans don't currently include growth, but we are always looking to get as much as we can from developer contributions. So absolutely, as we get more money in, we'll be looking at ways to apply that, and that would include trying to apply it to the LET or the gangs or other important priorities that the council might have for that money.
And then in regard to, obviously, so we can't increase the size, as Kelly said, with the budget, but obviously what we are always trying to do is encourage local residents to apply. So we've done a lot of work, as is in the report, with to do community engagement events. We are always promoting the LET as much as we can through obviously the leaders newsletter and on the council website for recruitment. So as soon as we're able, and when we're able to increase and recruit more people, we've got plenty of strands that we can go out and try and attract the best talent that we've done so far.
Councillor Ree.
Yeah, sorry, if I could just come in on that. Sorry, I'm sitting away because my big head is blocking the camera if I sit forward. I think it's important to look at the LETs in terms of the wider spend in terms of what the council does to prevent crime in the borough. So, yeah, we've got a 4-year capital spending project of 5.4 million on CCTV. We're, I think, possibly the best borough in the country in terms of CCTV coverage. We're already a small borough, but we've got a very extensive CCTV network, and you know, over the course of the year we put in £760,000 in order to maintain that. Also the violence against women and girls strategy as well, which I'm sure will be a big part of the work that some of the LETs are doing in terms of their patrolling and trying to keep the borough safe. We spend £360,000 a year on that as well. So although the LETs is a constrained budget, it's part of a much wider spending plan within the borough.
Just with regard, you know, I'm the chair of the planning committee, so just a sort of planning question or planning related question. And again, Councillor Dinsmore is right to say that the last 2 planning committee meetings have been cancelled. I'm told that's not because of a drying up of planning applications, but obviously we've all, you know, heard the news that we might be entering recession and there might be an economic downturn. So it's feasible that there might be a downturn of developments going ahead. And I note that obviously from the 4.7 million budget for the LETs, 2.2 million of it is from developer contributions. Is any forward planning being done just in case the developer contributions sort of dry up? I know you said, Bram, that it's from a sort of, you know, wider pot that stretches back 5 years, but, you know, is there any forward planning being done just in case that money does run out? Thank you.
Yeah, if I can clarify, first of all, the council is committed towards the law enforcement team. So what's been put in front of you is a current proposal for 23-24. If the situation changes, then the council will continue to be committed towards the law enforcement team, and we will find a way of funding it. So, yeah.
Thank you. That was nice to hear this categorical commitment. Just a question, Councillor Ree briefly touched upon the issue of violence against women and girls, and we've had, as part of this committee, the great work our departments are doing in protecting women and providing refuge. Is there something in the budget that is directly relevant to this, violence against women and girls, and how we make sure women are safe or taken care of in the aftermath of, for example, domestic violence?
Yeah, I'll take the budget implications and let Neil take over for the service side. So yeah, we do have in our base budget an allocation of 360,000 for violence against women and girls, and that is used to fund our refuges in the borough that we have, and also a dedicated lead officer for violence against women and girls. So that's something we added into the base budget as part of the MTFS process last financial year, we boosted that by £100,000. So we do also get external funding from the GLA that contributes to this as well, that allows us to provide a little bit more. So that is firmly in our base budget and part of our plans permanently going forwards.
Thank you. Neil, I don't know if you want to come in on this.
I mean, just to echo what Kerry said about the investment. So we've got a small team, a very good team of VORG officers. We've increased our investment in modern slavery exploitation, which will also disproportionately affect around violence against women and girls. We've got a number of LET champions that are VORG champions. Very fortunate to have a number of refugees in the borough, as we heard at the last PAC committee. And we've got a 4-year VORG strategy. So we're investing and developing our offer VORG all the time.
Thank you. Just on that point that you mentioned, of course, refugees is one item we've already looked, and I'm sure we'll look again in the future. How in the budget is the provision for refugee services and making sure that we take care of refugees in our borough?
So our funding for refugees sits outside of the Environment Department. So I don't have that information available to hand, but we could provide that to you outside of the meeting.
Yeah, if you could, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Any further questions or comments from committee members? Yeah, Councillor Dinsmore.
I'm just following up on Neil's answer about the costs. I'd be grateful if you could provide the details on the job requirement. Councillor Sisters quite rightly mentioned that the training of police officers is significantly higher and longer. And prima facie, it's difficult to see how the job requirements are therefore virtually the same, which is what the wages would imply. So if you could just provide those two criteria and why the wages are set the way they are, that would be very helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? No, in that case, does the committee happy to note the report? Thank you. We note the report and we're very grateful for all the work you've done over these past few weeks, and we'll see you in cabinet and then full council. Thank you so much for your great work. We will carry on and we'll go back to our original agenda as advertised, and we'll go with item 4, the annual performance report for the law enforcement team. We'll have a short update about the annual performance data and achievements since the formation of the service in April 2021. We'll hear from Mo Bassett joining us online, who is the lead manager, Neil Thurlow, who is here with us already, and Matthew Cooper, hopefully is able to join us online, Chief Officer of Safer Neighbourhoods and Regulatory Service. Neil, would you like to start us off? Or
so it's a short report, and to sum up before we go to questions, really. Obviously, we came to the last previous PAC meeting. This one follows on from that with updates on the key outcomes and achievements over the last number of weeks since the last PAC meeting. The report also notes and updates on the actions that were assigned in the last PAC as well. Mo's on Teams, as we say, in case there are any questions about the service, but I'm conscious that with the report being quite concise, we might just jump straight into questions if that's suitable to the board.
yeah, we can take the report as read. Do we have any questions from members of the committee on the report as it is, or any other questions you may have on the law enforcement team's performance over the last year and looking forward to the next few months and hopefully years ahead? Yeah, Councillor Miri.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. And thank you as well for the answer to my question in the last committee meeting about the number of female officers. So it was really good to see, and it's good to see that they've grown by 2 as well. I hope that continues. And I was reassured as well to see that there is a continued focus on increasing the number of female officers. So thank you for that. My question is to do with the priority patrols that the LETs do. So as a councillor, I've seen mention of the priority patrols in inquiries that I've made. In Andy Slaughter's office where I work, I've seen mention of the priority patrols. It would be useful if the list of the priority patrol areas could be shared with members of the committee, just so we know exactly sort of what some of the trouble hotspots are. And one sort of, thought, maybe concern that I had is that obviously if there are too many locations on the priority patrol list, then they cease to be a priority because there are only so many hours in the day and so many officers. I note in the report that sort of what constitutes a priority patrol is the officers visit it once a shift. And I wonder if, if there are fewer locations, then perhaps officers could visit each location more. And I'd also be interested, again, if you don't have this information out, that's fine, if it can be shared afterwards. I also wonder what the criteria is for a location being added and also a location being taken off once that's appropriate. Thank you.
So I think, I don't want to steal Mo's thunder, so I think he should be on the call if we can get him up. If not, I will answer the question, but as a service manager, he might like to take that himself. Mo, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. If you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Brilliant, fantastic. So good evening, Councillor Miriam. Good evening, councillors. I'm sorry I can't be there. Of course, the train strikes. I would like to have been there in person, so apologies for that. What constitutes a priority patrol? So priority patrols list consists of 20 locations that we have throughout the borough. So we've got approximately 900 to 1,000 roads locations within the borough. Of those, 20 have been defined as with increased demand. They've been put on that list. That priority patrol list is shared with all the let officers on a daily basis in the briefing that takes place at the start of their shift. If they're a ward officer, they pay particular attention to that area. Of course, the demands come from somewhere, either a resident or a colleague within the council. So we work closely with those contacts to ensure that the area is getting the attention that it needs, such as if there's demand for us to be there to tackle any antisocial behaviour, or if there's any occurrences of any waste disposal that's taking place that's causing concern to our colleagues in the streets and environmental department. Housing colleagues may get in touch to say we've had occurrences of youths or unauthorised access taking place in a particular block, so that will be added to the priority patrol. That suggestion that the patrol takes place once a day, I should just clarify that patrol takes place once a day by the shift. So the AM staff will conduct a patrol, the PM staff will conduct a patrol, and then the night team, when they come on at 8 PM, they'll also add that to their patrol. So they will go out to those locations, try and identify these issues that have been brought to our attention and try and resolve them whilst they're on site. All that findings is then fed back to the person that requested that location to be added to the priority list, so that over a course of time, it may take weeks, it may take months. We do hope to tackle that issue to the point that it doesn't return. And when we're satisfied that there is no further reports coming in for our demand for let, then at that point, we'll take that off the priority patrols list. I'm happy to share that with you at any point, but I should mention that the locations are constantly rotated. So some of the ones that have been there on for a long time will be assessed and changed for newer locations that have come to our attention as the demand changes for our intervention.
Thank you, Mo. Do you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mo. So can you clarify, is it always just 20?
We can increase that, but generally speaking, we try and keep it to about 20 because we think that's adequate. Where there is excessive demand, so the highest it's ever been is about 25, 26, but we do constantly monitor and keep on top of it. We check with the ward officers to ensure that they haven't received any further complaints. And then if they say that that issue has been resolved, then at that point it will be taken off the list. So it won't need the attention of all 3 shifts and the officers that work on those 3 shifts.
Great, thank you. And yeah, if you could share just the list as it is at the moment, and perhaps as well, if you could share, again, just for the benefit of the committee members, some of the locations that were on the list and that are now no longer on the list, which I think would just be a great sort of example of the success of the let team, that they were hotspots and now they no longer are. But thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Miri. And yes, that is a good action point, I think. Any other questions or comments, Councillor Dinsmore?
Thanks very much. Just a few questions on weapon sweeps, and then briefly some question on the employment statistics on the LETs. On page 21, you mentioned 864 weapon sweeps. You removed 10 weapons. The first point is that's just over 1% efficacy rate on weapons sweeps. I recall in July, Matthew Hooper said, that you've got to think that's possibly 10 lives saved. It's also possibly 854 lives lost if we had 100% efficacy rate. Is there any way of improving that is the first question. And the second question is, looking at the picture of the weapons, I mean, half of them are screwdrivers. Some are very much domestic, and there's one on the left that, you know, is obviously more significant. I mean, the 5 screwdrivers on the right, what makes you think those are definitely weapons as opposed to discarded screwdrivers? And why exactly are they falling within the weapons sweep statistics? Thanks.
Matt, did you want to answer that? You've got your hand up. I'm happy to if you want me to instead.
If the chair is happy for me to answer the question.
Yeah, of course. Just introduce yourself if you can as well.
So I think, you know, the thing we have to take into account here is that, first of all, the weapons that we found we've classed as weapons because they've been concealed. And so that's the reason why we've come across them, because we've searched in places that we know weapons get concealed. And it's not possible for us to know exactly why they've been concealed there, but I think it's reasonable for us to assume that the purpose was that they didn't want them to be found because they were intended for use as weapons. I don't expect, if I'm being completely honest, for the efficacy rate, as it's called, or the find rate, as I would call it, to ever be substantially very high. But the issue here is, you know, we are finding knives when we search for them, not in huge numbers, and I'm grateful for that, and I think we should be thankful that the numbers aren't huge. But, you know, I stick to the answer I gave in July last year. We're talking about weapons that, you know, could be used to kill and kill more than one person. And the damage to that, to the public purse, to the council, to the police, to the health services, is really, really substantial, even if it's one knife. So I think, you know, I'm really happy that we continue to find these weapons, and having worked in a previous borough in a different part of London, we found shotguns, shotgun cartridges, and all sorts of things. I hope that we don't find those in Hammersmith, but if we do, then at least we'll have removed them from the street.
I'm sorry, I don't fully understand that answer. On the one hand, you say you want to find weapons, take them off the street, and on the other hand, you say you're happy not to find weapons. I mean, I totally agree with you. Obviously, if there are weapons out there, it would be great to find them. My simple question is, can you think of any ways we could be more effective in the weapon street? Could it be more targeted, more intelligence-led? It just seems to me a lot to have 854 sweeps finding nothing when we are in the middle of an admitted crime epidemic from the Met Police, especially in relation to knife crime.
I think we continue to work with our colleagues in the police in terms of intelligence and working out where the problems are. You know, we're always trying to find different places where weapons might be concealed. So, you know, I'll stick to what I've said before. We, you know, we seek to find the weapons. We don't want to find an awful lot, but we are finding them, you know, gradually. We've found 10 weapons, which is an increase since the last time we reported that number. But we'll work with the police to try and identify where others might be secreted.
Thanks. A totally separate question. Just I'd echo what Councillor Meary said about the progress that's been made in increasing extra female LET officers, which is brilliant. Are there any specific schemes or incentives that you are using to try and increase representation of female LET officers?
So one of the ideas that we had amongst ourselves just now is we do a lot of engagement work while we're out in the community, and we hold an operation once every fortnightly. When we're speaking to these members of the community, we do often mention to them, especially those that are particularly keen to find out more about the kind of work we do, and they want to join in and do patrols with us. We do mention to them that there are vacancies, and, you know, obviously we always encourage local residents to apply for roles, because we see the value of having that local knowledge. So that's one of the ways. But I'm open to suggestions from any of the panel if they think there's other forums that we can go to advertise the vacancies.
Thank you. Thank you, Mo. Any further questions? Yes, Councillor Campbell, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. My question sort of comes on the supporting our homelessness community section of the report. Section 22, could you inform the committee or myself as well of what work has actually been done to reach out to rough sleeping organizations and partners in the community? It states it there has, but there's no data to say how many organizations or what organizations they are.
Okay, so good evening, Councillor. So we work very closely with Thames Reach. They are the outreach team that go out with our officers, and actually Stephen Tooby, I think is the lead on there. He is in constant contact with me whenever he has anything for the borough. So if there's a requirement for us to accompany his team, because often the outreach workers are working alone, so we provide additional resources by way of let officers and transport to transport them around the borough. We also get together a list of the locations where someone who's bedded down and sleeping rough, and we collate that and we pass that information to him, and we go to those areas. We accompany those outreach workers to provide them with some safeguarding, because they're often working alone and at night on their own. So that's the kind of help that we provide to them. We also had the severe weather emergency protocol during that period. So when the cold weather hit, we went out and we did additional work with the team to ensure that we reach all the sleepers that we know are bedding down in our borough. And we located some, and some had moved on and taken up the refuges that were open to them. So that's the kind of work that we do. I can provide data if you need it. And I can provide that because that should be pretty easy to get. So that will be the number of times we've gone out to find him, the number of times we've actually made referrals, and that kind of data can easily be shared with you if that's what you'd like.
Yes, that would be great. Just in terms of, I mean, by sort of, working in the community, what has there been any steps to maybe liaise and communicate with day facilities for homeless people in the borough, to sort of work in tandem with all the organizations? I understand you're working with the night provisions and the night outreach team, but what steps have been taken to engage other services that work with homeless people?
Okay, so we do have a rough sleeper coordinator within the council. So our referrals would be channeled through that rough sleeper coordinator, who would be generally responsible for having those kind of conversations. So that's probably best directed towards them. So I do know that whenever we come across someone who's new to the borough or someone we're not familiar with, of course, the let officers are familiar with the people that are usually bedding down in that particular ward. So if there's anyone new or someone that's a repeat person that we haven't seen or we've seen before, all that is channeled to the rough sleeper team, and then the rough sleeper team will coordinate the outreach work that takes place. And provisions of accommodation in the daytime and at night too.
Okay, so imagine one of your LET officers come across somebody who's rough sleeping in the daytime. What would be the correct protocol to follow in that situation? Would you signpost them to a provision in the daytime, or would you what would be the process that would be followed in that situation?
So there's two steps that we do. The first one is to make a street link referral to the Mayor's charity. That's the first thing, because all the referrals are done centrally that way. And the second thing is to pass on their details to the rough sleeper coordinator so that they can manage that case. And then that will be followed up by a visit by the rough sleeper coordinator to advise on any provision that's available to them. Or if that's communicated to the let officer at the time of the referral, we can dispense that information to the sleeper directly, so that transaction of information is done as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you for that, Mo. And just my last sort of question on this topic. It comes section 25 of the same section, supporting our homelessness community. It says in there that LET officers attend and assisted with rough sleep accounts. Is that data able to be shared with us and what the latest data for rough sleepers are in the borough?
I can provide the data that's available from the Let. We can also speak to a rough sleeper coordinator and amalgamate both of our returns and share that with you. That shouldn't be a problem.
Thank you.
Thank you. And apologies on my behalf. Councillor Campbell-Simon had told me earlier that there is a conflict of interest, a declaration of interest, rather, in that he works for the Barnes Court project, which works on homelessness. I forgot to read it off my notes. Apologies. Are there any further questions on this? Councillor Miri?
Thank you. So I've got a couple of questions about specific areas in the borough, namely Ashcroft Square off King Street or on King Street and Shepherd's Bush Green. And I sort of raised those two examples kind of to compare the two, because I know that Shepherd's Bush Green obviously for a long time was an antisocial behaviour and crime hotspot. And I've heard firsthand from residents that that seems to have subsided, I think, since the police brought in the partial closure order, and obviously the work that the LETs have been doing as well. And I'm reassured to see that the LETs are still patrolling that 3 times a day. So that's a sort of good example of something that's worked. With Ashcroft Square, I know firsthand from residents that the situation doesn't seem to be improving, at least from what I'm hearing from residents. And again, it's great that the Lets are patrolling it, and I'm seeing in the email chains that the Let team is very responsive to residents, a number of residents in particular who email and report antisocial behaviour and sort of really egregious antisocial behaviour as well around children and families. So I'm glad to see that the LETs are very responsive and that they're patrolling 3 times a day, but the issue doesn't seem to be getting resolved. And is that because there isn't a partial closure order on Ashcroft Square, or I might be mistaken with that? Maybe there is, but could you speak a little bit about why you think Shepherd's Bush Green has been resolved so effectively, at least from what I hear from residents and from your report, and why Ashcroft Square seems to still be quite a persistent and like I say, quite an appalling kind of situation that I'm hearing from residents there? Thank you.
So with Ashcroft Square, there's a number of departments that are currently involved in trying to bring some semblance of order into what's going on there. I should counter though, I haven't been able to corroborate, looking at all the data that's available to me, including the reports from the residents, all the assertions that there's consistent and constant ASB taking place there. It does happen, I don't dispute that, but the volume of offences that are taking place, I can't always corroborate the assertions of the residents, unfortunately. There is, as we speak today, there was a professionals meeting to fix some of the access points into the building, to review the actual, the design out crime police officer who was consulted also suggested some signage that could go up to tell unauthorized access or to deter unauthorized access. The doors need to be strengthened. There may be additional CCTV going in there so that when anyone is viewed going in or breaking in or trying to force entry, then the local Let officer can be radioed through so that we are responsive when we get down there straight away. I know the housing officer has been consulting all the residents as well. There's a lot of work going on. We're no way concluded yet, but I hope the returns that we've got for Ashcroft Square and the number of patrols that are taking place show how high it is on our priority to bring those complaints down, and to just reassure our residents that we are there. And actually, thankfully, when we're there, because of our uniform, you know, people do come and engage us and they say to us, thank you for being here. And there are many residents that live there. So the number of complaints versus the number of residents that live there are quite small in comparison. It's not that every resident is complaining about this issue. There are some residents who, unfortunately, and it is very unfortunate that they have to encounter anyone that's gained unauthorized access into the building. We are doing our best to stay on top of it, and we're speaking to all our partners in different departments to strengthen the security of the building so people can't get in, more vigilance by way of CCTV, and also more literature by way of signage to actually deter anyone gaining access, unauthorized access.
Thank you. Is this Ashcroft Square related?
Yes.
If I may, because we'll discuss this under item 6, and we'll have the police contributing as well. And we can discuss this more in detail later, if you don't mind, just.
Yeah, absolutely. I just did want to ask.
Is that okay? Yeah. Thank you, Mo. Thanks very much. And I totally understand there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes on this. So thank you to everyone that's involved. I just wanted to ask a quick question on sort of something you mentioned there about, obviously there are issues with repairs on Ashcroft Square. So let's say the doors are in a state of disrepair, or let's say if there are sort of housing concerns. How much of a link up is there between the LETs and those other departments? So, for example, if the LETs were to report to the housing team or the repair team that this is really a sort of trouble area or a hotspot and these things need to be fixed, do you feel that the liaison between the LETs and those other departments is quick enough and strong enough for them to also make it a priority because of what you're reporting back?
I do. So the community safety officer coordinates with all these agencies and all these partners. So that's really something that the community safety officer is the lead on. We feed in with our returns to see what our observations are. If there is damage, we report that to the community safety officer. Or only yesterday or the day before, we went out with the contractor and the community safety officer, the contractor for the repairs team. And we actually did a walkabout and we picked up all this and we detailed all the locations where there was some disrepair. That's not always with the door. That might just be walls that are, flaky, or there might be a lock on an electric cupboard that might need repairing because it doesn't look secure. So we've done a thorough search of the entire Ashcroft Square and all the locations that could do with a repair and some TLC. And we spent that time with them yesterday and we brought this to their attention, and I'm confident that they're going to work on it. And, this is going to be something, it might reoccur in the future, but I'm confident we've got the right connections to actually get the work done as soon as possible.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mo. I would like to invite a member of the public that is joining us here to ask a question. If you can say your name for the record, and if you could just press the button, the right button from the two,
Yeah.
that's the one.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm a local resident, and it was a bit of a misunderstanding. I thought that we were actually discussing the river PSPO this evening. Oh, it's coming. Oh, sorry. I might have jumped the gun. Sorry. Shall I ask now or late or after?
If it is related to the PSPO, then we'll come on to it in 5 minutes, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
All right. Okay. Oops.
Are there any, Councillor Campbell, Simon?
Hi, Mo. Just sort of follow, I haven't seen it in the report, but I do remember, I wondered if you could feed back. During the first meeting that we had, I sort of asked what steps were being taken to reach underrepresented communities in the borough. And I just wondered if there was any feedback on that, and if any of you have taken any steps, have they been successful or no?
Yeah, so so that wasn't actually one of the action points that I remember taking away. But in any event, we are following that meeting, which was in June, July. We did have a number of engagement events at local mosques in the north of the borough, and also I know the team's been very active with the mosque down in the south. There's other members of the so we always go to all the tenant and resident meetings. We're also attending all the ward panel meetings that we're invited to. So that's the kind of stuff that we're doing at the moment. If there's anything particular or any group that you'd like us to engage with, I'm happy to take that suggestion and take it away, and I can bring back the actions next time.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Are there any further questions or comments? Neil, if you want to contribute something, then I think we'll wrap up to go to the next item.
Yeah, just very briefly, maybe it's something we can bring back to a future meeting. So the law enforcement team have been doing a lot of work with a group called Neighbourly Lab, and Neighbourly Lab are an organisation that look how you connect to communities. So we spend a lot of time thinking about how do we engage and how do we make the let to be more understood by residents, how we can use them as community connectors to help us get into communities that maybe not understand what the let do, and how we do that, which proved really, really successful. Lots of training, lots of really positive feedback from the officers and from Neighbourly Lab and the residents themselves. If Councillor Campbell-Simon, the way that we are connecting and working with the underrepresented communities is something of interest, that maybe in the future PAC, depending on the chair and the board's thoughts, we might want to invite even Navy Lab to come and talk about our work with them, or we can bring you a future report on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that is very interesting and something that we can explore. If there are no other contributions, are we happy to note the report? In that case, we note the report and we proceed with item 5, which is on the public space protection order, which describes the application of public space protection orders, especially the 2 recent ones we've had on the use of dogs in our parks and public spaces, and the use of bikes and motor vehicles in the river path. We have Caris joining us, Service Transformation Lead, Safer Neighborhood and Registration Services. Neil, who's already joined us, and Beth Morgan, Community Safety Manager, is joining us online. I don't know, Neil, if you want to start off, or sorry, is it Caris that will be starting?
I was going to hand over to Caris, but yes, thank you.
Sorry, my apologies.
No, it's fine. Thank you, Chair. Caris.
Hi, my name is Caris. I'm the Service Transformation Lead in the Community Safety Unit. Just to give you a quick overview on what public space protection orders are, for those that don't know or aren't familiar, they came into place in the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act in 2014. And so sort of around 2015, this is when local authorities started to introduce them. It has to be aimed at specific and persistent ASB that is detrimental to communities. So the process for introducing a PSPO is quite thorough. We receive reports on ASB that's happening either in a specific area or across the whole borough. We gather evidence to see whether this is persistent or detrimental. We would then draft an order, which would go to our lead cabinet member and go out to consultation to see what residents' feedback is and whether residents feel that it is needed to have this order in place. From the consultation, we would use this to inform whether we would introduce the order and what the parameters around that order would be. So that could be around time, around area, or around the specific actions within that. We currently have 4 PSPOs at the moment that are live and active in the borough. 3 of those are banning amplification of noise. So we've got that in Hammersmith Broadway, Shepherd's Bush Green, and the recent one in White City. And then we've got one which is about the behaviours of alcohol consumption. So we recently went out to consultation on responsible dog ownerships. That went out to consultation at the end of November and closed 2 weeks ago now. And that covers dog exclusion areas. It covers dogs on leads areas. It would give the law enforcement team the powers to ask someone to put their dog on a leave if it's being misbehaved. It prohibits dog fouling and potentially prohibits the idea that someone should have a form of disposable bag to clean up after their dog. These were the proposed orders, and we are currently analysing the consultation responses, so seeing how residents felt about each individual order within that, and we will analyse those results and give a proposal and recommendation to Cabinet by the end of the financial year. Similarly, we've got our Thames Path consultation that is out, that is still live and out to consultation. That'll be closing this Sunday, and that covers what sort of vehicles should be allowed down the Thames Path, how they should be driven or ridden, and similarly we are asking about what times that should apply and what areas of the Thames Path that should apply. Similarly, once the consultation closes, we'll be analysing those results and presenting our recommendations to our lead cabinet member.
Thank you. Can I just quickly ask you, because you mentioned that the consultation on the use of cycles on the river path closes this Sunday. I thought it was on the 29th, 3 days ago. Has this been extended or?
Yes, so it was extended a few weeks ago just because we had some resident feedback that it felt that it wasn't advertised enough to the pedal cycles community. So those who don't use electric bikes but who do use just pedal cycles, and we wanted to obviously make sure that everyone had their fair input, and so we extended by a week just so that we could send it out through those channels of communication.
Okay, perfect. That is very good to know. Shall we start with the questions? And if we do, yeah, if you would like to set us off again, I would just ask you to, yeah, sorry for the wait, but thank you for joining us.
Yes, hello. So basically my concern about the PSPO on the river is that it's the law, could be the law of unintended consequences, because it's one thing when it's people speeding along and maybe upsetting others, which personally I haven't noticed very much, but I accept that others have. But what my concern is quite a lot of people, but my own daughter in particular, but she's one of many who use a bike that tows children in a little sort of carriage thing at the back. And some people have them at the front of their bikes. And it's really hard work. I think a 5-year-old child, the average weight is about 18 kilos. So you have a couple of 5-year-olds in there. They could be heavier than that. You could be a 50-kilo woman pulling 40 kilos behind you. And frankly, an e-bike makes all the difference in the world compared to a normal pedal bike. So I think it's a big risk of targeting people in that situation, of which there are a lot. I've noticed a lot of them. And clearly they're not going to be speeding. They care about their cargo, their precious cargo. And so I'm just very worried that they could get included in all of this. And I heard, I can't remember where I saw this, but I saw a suggestion of the residential streets. I'm thinking particularly between Putney Bridge and Hammersmith Bridge and, you know, so-called quiet residential streets. But then if ever anyone puts forward that argument, I'm sort of preempting this. I cycle, I don't cycle along the river actually, but I cycle in the streets. But I find that, first of all, I've noticed quite often vans that speed because there's no traffic, they do speed. And sometimes cars, not so much. And I've also you'll find that a lot of these streets, cars are parked on either side. So you've got just enough space for one car going one way and a bicycle going the other, but not two cars and not a bicycle that's got something this wide behind it. So actually those children become very vulnerable in those streets, which apparently look quiet and safe. And I mean, my daughter, you know, does that route, and she's seriously contemplating using a car instead. And she doesn't want to join the traffic jams, but, you know, you think about the children first. So I'm sure, I think everyone will agree that we don't want more cars on the road. So I just don't want the wrong people to get caught up in this. You know, sort of all e-bikes, to ban all e-bikes, then I think would be a huge mistake. I don't know how else you would sort of deal with any issues, but if you can avoid targeting the wrong people, that's why I'm here tonight, because I feel very strongly about it.
And thank you for coming. I think if you, it would be good if you address the concerns of Caroline's directly, but also tell us a bit about the process and the future stages with the consultation and what it means. I understand it's an ongoing process, so there may only be so much that you can share, but yeah, if you can address concerns especially. Thank you.
Yeah, so firstly, I'd like to say that we go out to consultation because we want to hear residents' views. You know, that the draft order that is supplied with a consultation is a draft for a reason, and it is not at all the finalised version. And so the way the sort of process works is that we will analyse that feedback and we take into account emails and phone calls and as well as the respondents from the Have You Say page, and we use this to influence what our recommendations will be to put into a report that will go to Cabinet. On top of that, we do an equality impact assessment. So once we have sort of assessed what we're thinking of proposing and whether what that will be, we will do that assessment that will go through our equalities team and be signed off by our chief officer as well. And that would take into consideration how it affects different protected characteristics groups. Under that would come parents and how they could be negatively affected if they are carrying children. Similarly, so if the feedback from residents following this consultation is that they feel like it would create more of a negative impact on cars on the road, you know, increasing that sort of form and how you transport children around, this will all be taken into account and produced as a recommendation, you know, in the final recommendation report. And following that report, the cabinet member will make a decision on how we process forward with this and whether a PSPO is introduced and what are the sort of terms and conditions that are in that order following the consultation.
Where will this, there's a council newsletter around, and will there be updates? I mean, how do I kind of follow follow what's going on without necessarily coming to meetings?
Do you want to go?
Yeah, so it's important to understand that. So as Cara says, so we analyze the responses, and I would encourage yourself and anyone else to still do that until Sunday. Because it's really important that we're here. And as we said, we can take it through have your say through emails, etc. We'll then, when we get to the point where, and so this is about saying where, assuming we go ahead, that we make a recommendation and the PSPO is signed off, there's any really important bit around our comms and our comms strategy, which will be around the law enforcement team, working with our police officers, working to engage people on the Thames Path so they're aware that this order's now coming, what does that mean? And working to make sure that everyone's aware of that. We'll have really clear comms on the council social media channels, on the website. We'll be working with our comms colleagues to get it into newsletters so that we can make sure we get it as far wide as possible. We'll be asking our our elected member colleagues to help us with their channels to push it out as well. So we'll make sure that we can do all we can to get the information out there as clearly as possible. Equally, what I would say is that depending if you need to shoot off or if we have a break, but we can give you our direct emails and then we can contact you directly and say to you where we are as that process goes along. So we have that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
No problems.
Thank you. Could I just add one other little thing? Well, sort of two, but I'll try and be very quick. So one is I'm concerned that those very few people who really couldn't care less, they might never catch them anyway. And so it would be ironic if, you know, people who are not causing trouble have a problem, and then those who really couldn't care less just shoot off, and that's that. And the other thing is that you do get that kind of cyclist sometimes on the pavement of the Fulham Palace Road, and there are some couple of bits that are very narrow. One bit's very near the Peabody estate. And twice this week, my husband has seen pavement cyclists shooting through there. And that's much more dangerous, I think, because you could get forced into the road in the path of oncoming traffic. And, you know, it wouldn't be just a few bruises. So I'd not actually seen law enforcement people along there. I don't know if they go there or not, if it's just that I haven't seen them. But I think that could be a sort of more, for me, a more important place to be checking, really. Yeah. Anyway, that's it. So I'm going to take up more of your time. Thank you very much.
I think, Neil, it would also be important to cover the point that Caroline is making, especially on the law of unintended consequence, as she phrased it, that whichever, you know, restrictions, if any, are introduced, that it ends up being the, let's say, law-abiding, or those that ride whatever vehicle, not in an unsafe way, not in a dangerous way. And there's some concern that it may be too vague, let's say. Is a provision to make sure, is the discretion to make sure perhaps that, you know, those that are not riding in an unsafe way perhaps will not be treated as if they are. And again, I understand that it's still, the process is still ongoing.
So again, that's really helpful feedback. So if the feedback is, and we hear it, and we'll take today's feedback as well, that the proposed prohibitions are a little bit too vague, for instance, they need to be refined and really kind of honed down. We can work through that and do that. I think it's also important to explain the way that we'd be enforcing this. So, you know, it's designed to tackle the antisocial behaviour that takes place against those people that cause problems along the Thames Path. And the history of that is, if you go back to when we had COVID and lockdown, we had significant numbers of complaints coming to the local authority where you had walkers, cyclists, mothers with babies, and others saying that actually these high-speed cyclists were causing real danger and were putting them and their families at risk. So, you know, the law abiding, you know, they won't necessarily be affected because they're cycling on the pedal cycle at slow speed. But equally, if we are getting feedback that we need to refine and hone down the proposed prohibitions, then we work with Councillor Harvey, work with our colleagues across the local authority to make sure we do that in the most appropriate manner.
Thank you. And before I open to questions from other colleagues, if I can ask that since we've extended the consultation deadline, it may have happened already, but if you can work with the comms department to make sure that this is advertised as such, because I'm sure there's a lot of interest in this. Are there any further questions? Councillor Dinsmore. And thank you so much for your questions. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Councillor Dinsmore. If I may, just Councillor Harper just wants to speak on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, because I wasn't sure if Caroline was aware, but we got the newsletter that goes out on Fridays that residents can sign up to find out more information. I don't know if she's having.
We'll also send it via email to her. Thank you. Yeah, sorry, Councillor Dinsmore, back to you.
Thanks. Just a very brief question. The buggies on bikes are sort of pretty readily identifiable, and I would have thought relatively easy to define. I mean, could that just be a simple carve out, e-bikes except for, and then we don't necessarily need to get into the driving dangerously discretion bit?
Yeah, so at the bottom of a PSPO, which comes in with the whole equality impact assessment, we have an exemption criteria. And so that will cover that, and following feedback and following the consultation, we can make note of this, and that would be a good example to put in the exemptions list. Currently, there isn't an exemptions list for this. Oh, actually, no, I think there might be. I have to double check that one, but yes, that would be something that we could easily include and process forward with.
Thank you. Any further questions on this item? I understand there will be a discussion as well in the upcoming cabinet, especially on the responsible dog ownership item. So I'm sure this will be something that we'll hear more of, and I look forward to discussing it in more detail at the following meetings we're going to have. And thank you very much, Caris, and thank you, Neil. In that case, we're happy to note the report, I understand, and we can proceed with item number 6 on the harmless hexagon, which outlines how policing partners are using practical evidence and academic research to target the areas of the borough most at risk of violent crime. And we will be joined by Superintendent Craig Knight and Inspector Debbie Fields, both of them joining us online. I hope they've been able to join. And of course, we have our colleagues in the room already. And the first question will go to Councillor Miri, because I interrupted him before. But if we can have the presentation from the police colleagues, if they're in the call, that would be great.
Yes, good evening, everybody, and thank you, Chair. I hope you can hear me. And my sincere apologies for not being with you this evening. Under normal circumstances, I would be there. Unfortunately, these are not normal circumstances. So allow me, if I may, to briefly introduce myself. My name is Superintendent Craig Knight. I am newly appointed to the borough and will be undertaking the role of Neighbourhoods Superintendent for Hammersmith and Fulham moving forward. That's part of the Commissioner and indeed the Mayor's commitment to enhance neighbourhood policing, which I'm sure we will discuss further in due course. I'd also like to thank, if I may, in advance, Elise Galatly for drafting the basis of these slides and for discussing it, I believe, in the past with others. I hope that the slides are informative. If I can have the next slide, thank you. Waiting for that to come up. Lovely, thank you very much. So let me first off really set the context of why we are where we are with these harmful hexagons. The evidence over the course of many, many years from academic research and indeed from practical policing experience has shown us that where we focus our efforts on areas of high crime or high harm, and I'll explain that in a bit more detail later, we have greater results. That's probably no great surprise to anybody, and it's an application largely of common sense. But what academics have been able to show by studying how these areas operate is that by putting visible policing, problem-orientated policing, and other activity, both by police and partners, into specific areas, you get a greater bang for your buck. So you actually get a much better return on your investment than you would otherwise do from having a general response to policing across a broader, wider area. Home Office recognise this, and they've taken account of previous work that's been done academically, largely speaking, in this country, America and Australia. And they have said, well, let's invest in that, let's put some money behind that. So Operation Nightingale is the culmination of the Home Office funding, which has come in across 3 years to target violence hotspots and to deal with violence, which of course is not only a metropolitan police, but a national priority for policing. And to enhance that with academic prowess around not only what has gone in the past, so we apply the learning from the past, but we also ensure that the learning from what we are doing now forms part of future academic learning. So a number of things have taken place in order to make that happen. We've enhanced the level of training to our officers that are doing this. We have worked with partners, including yourselves within the local authority and the law enforcement team, to try and build a better understanding of these hexagon spaces and what it means to us across London, across the 32 boroughs. If I can have the next slide. So this is an example of where those boroughs that we've got within the area AWBCU is 3 boroughs. As you may know, it's Westminster, Hammersmith and Fulham, and Kensington and Chelsea. And those 3 boroughs have a number of treatment areas represented by the red hexagons and a number of control areas which are represented by the blue hexagons. The difference between those, I'll just make clear. So the treatment areas get a slightly enhanced level of policing, they get a slightly enhanced level of scrutiny, and much more emphasis on problem-orientated policing. The treatment areas are those areas, we don't walk away from policing those areas, just to reassure the public, but we don't give those areas any enhanced policing. They are chosen randomly, and they represent policing pretty much anywhere else in London. But they are chosen as comparison areas with the same geographic area and similar geographic natures in terms of the amount of open space versus green space versus private space. That allows academics and scientists to properly review the effect that we are having in those treatment areas. For those interested and for those academics that may be around the room or elsewhere online, there are a number of key academics that operate within this space. The one that I will quote first and foremost in this is Professor Larry Sherman of Cambridge University and his theory on hotspot policing and how that sort of moves us forward and how we are using the work of Professor Sherman here in London. If I can have the next slide. So this is an example, obviously, of Shepherd's Bush and one of those hexagons, and you will have seen, and I've listened very carefully to the meeting so far, how the work of Shepherd's Bush has been acknowledged by many of the audience this evening. This is obviously a control area; it's in red, and this has received a level of enhanced policing. Now, we're very lucky here in Hammersmith. We have some outstanding ward officers. We have outstanding partners, such as yourselves, that work alongside the police. And if I'm being frank, we have a very supportive public that support us in providing us with local information, intelligence, and support for activity that we're undertaking. And what that means to us as a police service really can't be underestimated, because in the use of specific powers, when we use them, the way we use them is very much dependent on how the public are likely to react to it. Because if we get the use of powers wrong, we will lose legitimacy in our communities. That has not only an impact on whether or not the community feel they can trust the police service, but indeed any authority. And it will have a great impact and frankly, an enormous impact on us moving forward, because as we know, the police service is at the moment in a position where we have to build trust that has been lost over the course of the last 18 months, 2 years, by circumstances. So the work in that particular area has been done by the local ward team. It's been enhanced with the additional Home Office funding to provide additional police officers, additional policing presence. And in that area, we've looked at exactly when the crime is occurring, the type of crime that's occurring, and we've dedicated our response to the type of crime and to the locations and activities that are being undertaken in that space. So we've really honed in. If you can imagine a surgeon operating on a human, you don't take the tonsils out by starting off by cutting the foot off. You have to work on the area that you need to target, and you have to be very precise in doing so. So this is a scalpel approach to policing. The other thing, of course, that we've had here, which is innovative in its very nature, is the partial closure order within Shepherd's Bush Green. That's gone in for 3 months. It's been based, of course, on the Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act. And that gives police and others an opportunity to really focus activity on what is taking place on that open space, and to make it effectively illegal to be there and undertaking those activities. And it's really allowed us to target those individuals who are using that space for the wrong reasons, and to hopefully rebuild trust in those that want to use it for legitimate reasons, to allow them to do so and to feel safe in doing so. So if I can have the next slide. The circle in the corner there in red, I don't expect that to mean a great deal to people because there's a lot of numbers there. But the reality of where we are in the last 3 months is that crime has consistently fallen in that space. And it's not just consistently fallen by 1 or 2 offences. As you see there, we're talking double numbers consistently for the last 3 months. So if you add those numbers up, we are talking well over 100, 150 fewer victims of crime in that space alone. Now, to put that into context, that hectare is roughly speaking, that hexagon, is roughly speaking 1 hectare in size. They're all the same size. Every hectare is mapped across London in that way, and you can map any single hectare within a lower super output area of a borough or a ward. The reason it's done in hexagons, for anybody interested, is simply because of the mapping tools that we use. It is difficult to map circles next to each other because, as you'd appreciate, we'll have gaps that are missing, and the squares don't allow us effectively to use the space and to study the space in the way we would otherwise have liked. So we use hexagons. And those hexagons allow us to apply mathematical theories and algorithms to studying the crime types in a really thorough way. So if I can move on to the next slide. Thank you. This is the second treatment area. There are 2 on our borough. And this, of course, is Hammersmith Broadway. Whilst I don't have the crime data mapped for you, what I can say is that overall crime in the 3 months to December has fallen in that hexagon by 30%, and it works out to just under 100 fewer offences. So what you can see by looking at this, I hope, is that police and partners are working together in specific crime areas that they've been given to us by analysts in terms of this is where we as a borough should be focusing our activity. Now, that doesn't mean that we are not policing anywhere else. Just make that very, very clear. We don't stop policing any area. What this does is to say, in this area, there are these crime types or this activity which suggests that your overall crime rate is higher, or that there's activity that you can specifically target in those areas. And obviously, dependent on the hexagon that you are looking at across London, will depend on the crime type and the nature of the activity you undertake to do that long-term problem solving. So if we take the two examples of that we've got here in Hammersmith Broadway as a hexagon, really that's about the nighttime economy in terms of the volume of offending. So our response to that will differ in terms of its open space activity to that of Shepherd's Bush Green, which is more around open space drug dealing, drug supply, and other activity, and obviously some open space robbery offences. So the nature of the offending differs in those spaces, but the response to it in terms of dedicated problem solving, enhanced policing activity, and most importantly, a real focus on the analysis of what we are doing and whether or not it's successful, hopefully allows us to apply consistent pressure on those spaces to reduce crime. That's the last slide in my presentation, because I wanted to make it short and sweet so I don't bore people half to death. But what I would conclude with really are a number of points which I'd just like to make. First of all, as I mentioned at the start, there is a difference between hotspot and harm spot policing. Now, what I mean by that is hotspot policing is saying there's a lot of crime in this area by dots on maps. Those dots are each one single incident is separately counted as one incident. Harm spot policing allows you to score those incidents based on the severity and nature of the crime. Now, to give you an extreme example, a theft of a tricycle outside of a person's house is a crime, and a robbery of a person is a crime. But many people in society, based on what judges have said and what society is saying around the sentence of that crime, will say that actually one is more serious than the other. Both serious, but one more serious than the other. What the harm spot policing allows us to do, and what analysis of harm spots allows us to do, is to look at where the most harm occurs to society, so on the most serious offences, and to target those spaces as well as the sort of high volume space. The two geographic areas that you're looking at there are both the highest harm and the highest incident locations. So we've really started to look with some science at where best to police and to apply that science to our policing tactics. My role and that of my colleagues that I work for within policing, particularly at the front line, is to ensure that we then put the right resources and the right problem solving techniques into fixing those problems. And I think you'll see from the results, not only in those two areas, but across the borough, where crime has consistently fallen over the last 3 months, and has done actually over the last 12 months in many areas, where we are beginning to apply that science and that technology, we are beginning to have better results. Now, that's not saying that more can't be done and should be done, because it must. And I absolutely acknowledge that policing generally, and policing particularly in London, has a great deal to do to rebuild public trust. One of the benefits of doing this hexagon policing is that actually we begin to increase public legitimacy, because we can say with absolute justification why we are there and why we are using the tactics that we are adopting. So if we take examples like stop and search, very contentious use of a tactic, we can say that we are in this area because science tells us it's the right place to be to stop crime or to detect those crimes that are being committed. And we are using these tactics to do that. And it just allows us to have a better conversation with the public, a more informed and more transparent conversation with the public. And finally, from me, before I open it to any questions people may have, is the plea to consider the Commissioner's turnaround plan online. If you haven't done so, just go onto the Met Police website and have a look. Because at the heart of this plan, at the heart of these hexagons, at the heart of what we are trying to achieve as a police service, is the Commissioner's promise, and indeed my promise, because I echo the Commissioner, to create the strongest possible community policing model here in London, and to do so with 3 simple strategic aims: more trust, less crime, and finally, higher standards. And by doing those things, I hope that we can rebuild the trust not only of the public of Hammersmith and Fulham, but elsewhere across London, and that we can do so collectively and in partnership with yourselves. Thank you for your time this evening. I hope I haven't bored you too much, and I'm certainly open to any questions you may have.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You've given us a lot to think about, and I'm sure we'll have plenty of questions. Councillor Mary, would you like to begin the questioning?
Thank you. Hello, thank you very much, Superintendent Knight. That was very, very informative and very helpful. Thank you. I've got a few questions. Is it okay if I give you all of them and then you can just take them one by one? Is that okay? So my first question is with regards to the Shepherd's Bush Green PCO. Can you tell me if there's a time limit on that? So yeah, how long do they usually last? And if so, when is the current one set to expire? A similar question, the hexagon sort of model, is that time-based? How long do you, I know the operation lasts till 2025, so is what you showed us intended to last until 2025, or is there, do they need to be renewed, every 6 months, or, is there any kind of statutory, requirement for them to be renewed, or is it just more of a sort of operational thing? Back to the Shepherd's Bush Green success, and again, just to sort of corroborate what you've said, I think we've heard from residents that that has been a success, but I wonder, has that been a success because of the PCO or because of the hexagon model of policing? And is there any way that you can assess that and differentiate between the two? That would be helpful. I also just wanted to flag, sorry, I know I'm going on a bit, but I wanted to flag the issue of knife point thefts in the Hammersmith Broadway station. I'm sure you're aware of it. And that obviously falls under the King Street hexagon. But can you talk a little bit about what's being done to address that? I think they're British Transport Police. I've seen a much bigger presence in the station, but I wonder if the Met Police are kind of cooperating on that as well. And then finally, just with regards to the hexagon, so I understand you've laid out very clearly, why they're in place and what it looks like, but practically, does it provide additional powers to the police? I know a PCO might, but does the hexagon model mean that they can do more when they're in that space? And again, practically, does the increased police attention to the area just mean sort of more of a police presence, more patrols, or is it targeted? What does that look like on the ground? Thank you.
Thank you. Great questions. If I just go through them in order, and I'll answer them as we go, but some, as I hope you'll understand, will overlap in very nature. So the timeline, it is timed, the Shepherd's Bush Green closure order or partial closure order. They last for 6 months and can be renewed for a further 3 months to allow up to 6 months. Now, that has to be done based on the evidence available. And we are, I know I've spoken to Neil, Matthew and others within the local authority and within policing to gain a view as to whether or not that should be extended. And that debate, I think it's fair to say, is ongoing at this time. The general view, though, from my perspective as a senior police officer, is that you have to base it on what is proportionate in society, because it does give officers additional powers, which we have to be very careful in how we use. Those additional powers, I think, if crime is falling, it's difficult to justify those additional powers. Because if crime is falling consistently over the course of a period of time, we're effectively going back to a court and say, look, saying we've done really well. We need to obviously monitor what happens, but at this time we'd like to continue it for a further 3 months to see what happens. That's not really a proportionate use of those powers. What would be proportionate is to stop it, to review what's happening. We're not going to walk away from policing Shepherd's Bush Green, obviously. You've still got a dedicated team there, and we'll monitor it on a fortnightly basis, indeed on a daily basis, effectively, as to what's happening in that area. And if we then start to see an increase in that criminality again, what we can do is go back to the court, and I think rightly at that point, whenever that is, and it might be a week, but we can go back to the court and say, look, we've stopped this. It was proportionate to stop it. However, crime is increasing again, and it provides us with the best possible evidence to go back to a court and for a court to justify the decision to extend it for a further 3 months. And that's because it is quite a use of a power to restrict society's ability to use open space. And it's not been done very often in this country. I think Shepherd's Bush was the second. It may have even been the first, but there's 2 in the UK currently, or England and Wales, sorry. Your second point around the hexagon model, the hexagon model obviously is a design for reviewing crime and crime types and patterns. It's reviewed on an almost fortnightly basis through something called a TTCG process, which the local authority attend with me. And that process looks at crime effectively across the 3 boroughs within my sphere of responsibility, but focuses obviously on where those hexagons are saying we've got the most crime and activity. So the hexagons will change over time. What this has done, this particular model here and the extension to 2025, it's saying that these hexagons across London, the ones that we've got mapped here, are consistently high, and we need to understand and problem solve those. That brings me to the question around whether or not we have additional powers in those spaces. Unless we apply for additional powers, no, we don't. But what we have done is obviously used the Home Office funding in a very carefully and hopefully constructive way to problem solve activity dedicated to those spaces for long-term problem solving. So I know, for example, that in Shepherd's Bush Green, conversations have been ongoing around street lighting and how we can potentially enhance street lighting to make those spaces safer. And some of the funding that the Home Office have provided is going towards potentially funding street lighting, if that's the right thing to do in that space to reduce crime. So we're looking at the best ways to use the Home Office funding for long-term problem solving. So no extra powers, but a better and more applied use of problem solving in that space. The question around why it's successful in Shepherd's Bush, I think like any other space, if you target and focus good people into an area, you tend to have good results as a result. What we've got at Shepherd's Bush is a truly worthwhile partnership between a number of organisations, not least police and the local authority, and we've really focused dedicated time and effort into that space. And we've got the science behind what's happened in the past over the course of the last 3 years, which is the original data set that was used to create these hexagons. We've used that to really enhance our problem solving capability and our decision making around what activity we needed to do. So I think that's why it's been a success. The reality is that problem solving needs to continue, not just until tomorrow or whenever the process sort of comes to a point where the public are happy with our activity. It needs to extend well beyond that to design out crime long term. So how that space is used moving forward, both in terms of Hammersmith Broadway and Shepherd's Bush Green, needs to be really carefully considered over the next 3 years and beyond that. And obviously the police will play a part in that process. You mentioned knife point thefts. There has been a reduction in knife-related crime across the borough since September, which I'm pleased about. But obviously, any crime where a knife is involved is one too many. We are working with British Transport Police. We are aware of why crime occurs in particular areas. And when you've got high-density footfall, and effectively it's called a victim-offender location triangle, but where you've got offenders willing to commit crime, victims with things to steal, and a location suitable for that crime to occur, then the 3 things come together and effectively a crime can occur. Doesn't always necessarily happen, but it can. So we're working with British Transport Police. Obviously, we're reviewing on a weekly basis. In fact, I review on a daily basis the robberies, where they are, why they're occurring, and my officers have that intelligence and information. So the types of victims, We'll go and speak to individuals who might not have the spatial awareness. We'll speak to young people who might get robbed walking home from school. We'll target those offenders, both in terms of the use of stop and search, or if we know offenders are operating within our patch, we'll target those quite specifically. I don't want to go too far into the tactics for obvious reasons. And obviously we'll patrol those areas alongside the law enforcement teams, British Transport Police and others, to make sure that the spaces that these people are operating in feel unsafe for them to operate in terms of the offenders feeling unsafe to commit crime there. Doesn't completely answer your question, but hopefully it goes some way to answering that point around Hammersmith Broadway and the rail station. Does it provide additional powers? I think I've covered, but what I would also add to that is the benefits of those hexagons and the benefits of the additional funding have meant that we've been allowed and able to put additional policing asset in terms of hours patrolling into those spaces at key times. So I think whilst we don't necessarily have additional powers, police officers obviously use their powers whilst they are on patrol and on duty. And the fact that we are in those spaces more, I think means you get a better bang for your buck out of us in those spaces. Hopefully that answers your questions.
Thank you so much. Much appreciated.
Thank you for this. Are there any further questions from other members? I just wanted to ask, you mentioned other partners in the local authority, and of course we discussed today the year review of the law enforcement teams. I just want to say if you work a lot with them in Shepherd's Bush or in the King Street Hexagon, and what sort of form this cooperation usually takes.
Yeah, well, like sort of my previous roles, I'm really keen on working with any partner that's able to bring asset to bear to reduce crime. And the law enforcement team do that. They do that in a number of ways. The fact that they are uniformed provides visible guardianship in communities. And the fact that they are able to bring to the table often really useful, valuable community intelligence. Alongside the role of the PCSO, for example. And if I may, I sort of liken those two roles very much indeed, because they're limited in terms of powers, but that's often a good thing. You don't necessarily often want members of the community in uniform with powers, because people are often fearful of approaching us. And you will have seen from the media and the reaction of many members of the public to police use of powers over the course of many years, stop and search being the best example, where actually they don't want to approach us and tell us what's going on. But they will approach law enforcement teams, they will approach PCSOs and others. And we're, by working together, able to gather that information in the right way and to utilise it together. We absolutely do joint patrols. And I know that my officers and ward teams operate alongside the law enforcement teams. And I know there is a constant and ongoing dialogue between them, CCTV control operators, and other partners, charities, organisations, homeless groups, anybody, frankly, that will work alongside the police, we're happy to work with, as long as it's legitimate and appropriate to do so. But the law enforcement team are a critical part of that and provide really valuable assets.
Thank you. That's very useful. Yeah, Councillor Dinsmore.
Thanks. Just one brief follow-up question, which might be as much from Neil as you. I just wonder if there's any additional training the police could supply to the LET officers. You've described a very healthy cooperative relationship, which is great, but I am aware of quite a big gap between junior police officers and LETs in terms of training. And I just wonder if it's something to explore, additional targeted training on specific issues that LETs face. As I say, I'm not sure if that's a question for Neil or for you, but just a query.
It may be a question for both of us. From my perspective, I'm always keen to share training opportunities. I would love an opportunity if Neil wants to extend it for me to talk to the teams. In fact, I'm going to one of their management meetings in the not too distant future and towards the end of this month. So I'm happy to talk to teams. I'm happy to offer advice and guidance, and to give what training we can that is appropriate to their role. The additional training that police officers receive is often sort of legislation focused, and I guess sort of operational support training, if you like, so the use of handcuffs and other things to provide them with that enhanced capability. Because a lot of the things that we do are about quite coercive powers, and we have to do that in very, very careful circumstances and with properly trained staff to do it. But that doesn't mean that we can't utilise space to train problem solving, to train cooperative working, or to look at spaces in a different way. And I'm more than happy to do that. I'm not a dedicated trainer in that I don't have a skill in that, but I'm happy to present and have done for many years on problem solving policing, on violence against women and girls, my previous roles in that space, and in other areas where we can share training opportunities. I don't know whether Neil wishes to come in there.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. So I think to extend it out just beyond the Let. So, the community safety unit is quite large, one of the largest, as we know, in the capital. So the police have already been really helpful around weapon sweeps and how we take that safely, how we handle weapons, providing us with tubes so we can take them down to the police station, the police can do what they require around that. We've started to do radio training. So in order to improve our CCTV response, our Let response around communicating with each other on the radios, Inspector Debbie Field, who I think is also on the call, has been really helpful in getting that sorted out. And then as Craig says, VORG, modern slavery, ASB collaboration, the closure order, Sergeant Tom Cook worked very closely with us to look at how we would both benefit from that work and how we could both use the ASB powers to help with that. And problem solving. I mean, I think HEX is Shepherd's Bush Green, HEX is Hammersmith Broadway. But for the Community Safety Partnership, those two areas were our problem solving areas as well. So thankfully, the Metropolitan Police's data is aligned where we knew those crimes were taking place, and we've got a formal problem solving approach there as well. So the training, I would say, is both informal, you sort of that osmosis learning, as well as when we do formal training together. But with Craig and with Inspector Debbie Field, we've done a lot already, and we're doing a lot more day in, day out. And those contacts and those dialogues are daily across all different layers of both organisations.
Thank you. Just one more question for you, Superintendent. You may have covered it and maybe I missed it, but is there any threshold or any prospect of introducing more hexagons in Hammersmith and Fulham? I'm thinking in particular of moving towards the south of the borough, and I know that in recent weeks and perhaps months in the Fulham Broadway area, for example, there's been an increase of theft from outside cash points as people have withdrawn money, or some youth violence incidents around the streets to the west of Northam Road. Is this something that would fall perhaps some that the HEX approach could look into, or is this something that you deal with in more conventional, let's say, ways?
Thank you. I think it's important to stress that, as I hope I made clear, we're not stopping policing any area because we're using a hexagon approach. What these two hexagons are is a specific response to additional Home Office funding and additional opportunities to do very dedicated problem solving into spaces which have historically been consistently higher in crime and harm than other areas. Pretty much every week, and I know my colleague Debbie Field's online as well, and she does this on a probably daily basis. We look at the crime across the borough and across every ward to look at what crimes are being committed. We have dedicated officers in every ward, and those officers will obviously respond to those crime types. If those crime types then form part of a series or something which on a sort of fortnightly basis appears to form some sort of trend, that's normally discussed through our tasking processes, and we can bring additional asset to bear to deal with those issues. What I would say, and it was a point very well made by one of your colleagues earlier, that we can't focus on everything. And we have a limited asset which we can deploy. It's a good asset, They are outstanding people, and I'm genuinely very lucky to be working alongside them. But what I would say is they can't be everywhere at once, and we have to decide what is most important to our communities. Now, we do that in a number of ways. We have a top-down approach of these are the priorities for London. Obviously, some of those we know very, very well: violence against women and girls, violence with injury, homicide. They are national priorities and obviously priorities for London. And then we have a sort of bottom-up approach, which is, well, what matters most to our communities? And we do ward panels and other things to identify that, as we all know probably around this table. But what we do is obviously apply asset depending on the type and nature of the crime. So the more serious the crime type, the more asset that it receives, both from a local perspective and a national perspective. But some minimums are set for every single ward. And I know the Commissioner and the Mayor currently are looking at what commitment moving forward over the next 3 years neighbourhood policing looks like. And I certainly think that we'll see an increase in a uniformed presence in our communities from a policing perspective, whether that's PCs or PCSOs or some other form of asset. That's a decision for the Mayor and the Commissioner at this time. But we will see, I think, that strongest community policing structure that the Commissioner has promised come to fruition over the next 2 to 3 years.
That's great. Thank you so much. I don't think we have any other contributions. Thank you very much, Superintendent, and hopefully we'll have you again at the committee. Are we happy with the report, colleagues? In that case, the report is noted, and we can move on to item 8, which is the work program. And this is the point where colleagues can suggest items that they would like to discuss in future meetings. If you have any suggestions, you're more than welcome to share them at this point. If not, that's also fine. More for me. Yeah, Councillor.
I just thought Neil's suggestion was very good about bringing in Navy Blue, about engaging with communities. So I would definitely support that if we could organise that.
Yeah, no, I thought that was a very good idea. Can I just say that I think it would also be good, and now that we've made the first introduction with Superintendent Knight, I think it would be good, perhaps even in the next meeting, depending on their availability, to have the police come and we can talk more about policing across the borough, and especially around issues such as stop and search. And I have discussed with some community organizations that, and residents who are, especially with all that is happening in the news with the Met Police, they would be very interested to have this discussion. So I think that's something worth pursuing. I don't know, Councillor Harvey, is there something that you would like us to perhaps discuss, some sort of heads up that you would like to give us about things that perhaps we could look in the future?
Not right at the moment, but I would like to, I think it would be really great if the committee could give their thanks to the Let's team and the Fulham team for their hard work in community safety. Absolutely. We're always grateful, and we'll continue to hear from the Let's team. I see our role as, overseeing the fantastic work and making sure in this entering the second year of the work to make sure that they continue to improve as they've always done. In that case, we move on to the final item, date of future meetings. The next meeting is in 40 days from today, more or less, Tuesday, the 21st of March. And the council calendar for 2023 and 2024 has been agreed, and you should have received those invitations in your diaries. If not, just let Bathsheba know. And in that case, we'll close the meeting here. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much for coming to our officers and to guest contributors and those who joined online. And we'll see you soon. Thank you.